Chapter 536. A Good Laugh. 1. It was only momentary. But in that brief moment of time that Duke Adramelech laid eyes on the figure standing in the middle of the room, he suddenly felt an ominous chill run down his body. While it came and went as fast as it came, it had a profound impact on him, causing his guard to rise right away. A nervous grin spread across his face as he examined him closely. White hair, blue eyes, human? Duke Adramelech's eyes widened at that moment. He then opened his mouth calmly. Your White Death. His white hair, the fact that the events unfolded near the Pride clan's border, and his human status. Duke Adramelech instantly came to this conclusion. He was White Death. Upon coming to this realization, his mind started to race as he also thought of something else. If you're really White Death, then everything makes sense. In no time at all, he understood what had truly transpired at the border. Raising his head, his eyes met with White Death's. Everything that happened in the border was something you did on purpose to divert my attention from the arena so you could sneak in and do whatever you wanted. Glancing around the place, his brows knit. Was your goal to enter the treasury and take all of the stuff? His voice contained a trace of uncertainty. Although the treasures in the treasury were valuable, they were not something that someone on a duke level would desire. In most cases, that kind of stuff would be too valuable to not be consumed immediately. That's not it. White Death's voice caught the Duke's attention, snapping him out of his thoughts. I don't care about what you found out. I'll cut straight to the chase. Extending his hand, a black sphere suddenly materialized in his hands. The Duke's countenance changed the moment his eyes laid on the sphere. With only one glance, he was able to instantly recognize what the object was. That's Duke Azanecha's core. So it was the truth. He really did kill Azanach. White Death smiled at the sight. That's correct, I'll give you this in exchange for you helping me get out of this city and keeping everything under wraps. Hearing his words, Duke Adramelech became even more guarded. In fact, he was also actually a little bit worried. If rumors are true and he indeed defeated Azanech in 2 seconds. His body shuddered. The reason for his victory, whether Duke Azanach had been caught off guard or underestimated him, did not change the fact that he had beat a Duke-ranked demon. Someone whose strength rivaled him. There was no way he was going to make the same mistake. Staring at the orb, he warily opened his mouth. You want to propose a deal? That's correct. White Death nodded. Extending the hand that was holding the core, he continued. I'll give you this, and in exchange you will help me get out of this city alongside 2 other people. Escape with 2 people? A frown appeared on the Duke's face as he listened to his words. Given your strength, you shouldn't have a problem escaping. I wouldn't. White Death shook his head. But it would be a hassle. Let's exclude the barrier that is currently overlooking the entire city. If you and all the other demons come at me at once, I'll have a hard time escaping. Especially since I'm trying to protect a couple of people. Pausing for a second, he added. Also, and the main reason is because I want all the information about me sealed. I don't want other demons hunting me down while I'm trying to leave. Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, Duke Adramelech calmly listened. Throughout the entire time, his eyes would linger on the orb that he was holding. It's not a bad deal. To be honest, the deal wasn't actually terrible. It was famously known that the likes of Duke Azanech and him didn't get along well. This wasn't because they had an enmity from the past or anything that grand. It simply had to do with the fact that they both desired the entire city and arena for themselves. It took a lot of resources for demons to rank up, and although the city and arena provided plenty of resources, it wasn't enough for 2 dukes. Hence why the 2 of them never got along. With him now gone, the entire city was now his to rule, and so were the resources. Furthermore, if he managed to get a hold of the core. Raising his head, he glanced around the treasury. Noticing that a lot of the items that were previously here were missing, the frown on his face deepened. It seems like you took quite a lot of the items here. It would have been a... Shut up. Cutting the Duke off, White Death suddenly clenched the core. I'm going to make this clear now. This is not a negotiation. It is either you agree with what I said, or I will take matters into my own hand. His eyes slowly shifted from blue to gray. Don't mistake my proposal as a sign of weakness. Just like the other Duke, I can kill you if I wanted to. The only reason why I'm proposing the deal in the first place is because of all the problems that will arise from me not doing this. Choose carefully. The look on Duke Adramelech's face sank as he listened to what he said. Staring at the place one more time, he asked. What did you take? You value your life less than the items that I took? Answer me. Duke Adramelech's voice raised. Demonic energy started leaking out of his body. He actually threatened me? Duke Adramelech's teeth clenched tightly. Given the clan that he was in, the Pride clan, Duke Adramelech would never agree with a deal that was at least equal to or in favor of him. Even if it ended up costing his life, he would never agree to a deal that was unfavorable to him. Impossible. Exactly at the moment when Duke Adramelech was about to blow up, he heard the words of White Death. All the martial manuals belonging to the humans, a couple of high-ranked herbs, an S-ranked artifact and an ranked skill Shadow Servant. These are the items I took. The choice is up to you. Do you want to fight me over these items and most likely die, or do you want to make a deal with me? The demonic energy that was threatening to spill out of the Duke's body stopped. He slowly started to calm down. Staring at White Death that was looking straight at him, he proceeded to look around the place. He wasn't sure if he was telling the truth or not, nor did he know all of the items that were stored in the treasury. But I can have all my servants check for me later. What was important at the moment was figuring out whether these items were worth agreeing to a deal or not. After a while, glancing at White Death that was still looking at him, he ordered. I'll think about it. Follow me to my office. He then turned around and left the treasure. What a mess. Walking through the corridors of the arena, Lightning Dragon shook his head. Although everything looked to be the same as it was in the past, it was in fact far from that. There was this weird tension permeating throughout the whole arena, and all the demons were on high alert. What I don't get is why White Reaper didn't choose to escape. It was only for a short moment, but the moment that he killed the Duke, he could have escaped from the place. Back then the barrier was still not erect and he wouldn't have had trouble leaving the place. However, such a thing was no longer possible now with the barrier intact. To further add to that, Lightning Dragon also felt the presence of another powerful figure inside the arena. It was most probably the other Duke and the only person that could put up a fight against White Reaper. Placing his hand underneath his chin, he mumbled out loud. Does he have some sort of goal in staying here? I do. In the moment those words left his mouth, a voice echoed from behind him, startling him. Huh. Turning around, he was shocked to see White Reaper standing right behind him. Staring into his eyes, Lightning Dragon quickly calmed down. With his forehead creased and his eyes focused on the figure opposite him, he eventually asked, which White Reaper am I talking to? There was a subtle look of surprise on White Reaper's face when he heard his words, but it soon turned into a thin smile as he responded. The same one that fought against you. I see. Carefully scrutinizing his body, he slowly nodded his head. From the way the mana is flowing and his demeanor, it looks like he is telling the truth. His guard relaxed the moment he heard those words. He wasn't as wary of this version of White Reaper compared to the other one. Just thinking of the other one made the back of his hair stand. With his shoulders relaxed and glancing around the place, his brows knit for a bit. He found the fact that no demon had come for him quite odd. Nevertheless, he still asked, what are you looking for? You. Me. Lightning Dragon asked in surprise. Why was he looking for him? White Reaper's next words answered his question. I need your help leaving the demon realm, and I know that you're the only one that knows of a way out. How long has it been since I've been here? Inside a dark cell room, a soft voice echoed out. It belonged to none other than Edward, who was still locked up in the cell. Has he won? His soft voice once again echoed throughout the empty cell. It had been a couple of days since he had been here, and he had been enduring every day in hopes of Ren accomplishing whatever he had planned. He wasn't exactly sure if the plan had worked, however, he knew that something was up. Especially since he had not seen a demon enter his cell over the last day. Typically they would come to give him food or check up on him, but none of that happened. Had they perhaps given up on him and decided to just let him starve to death? Edward highly doubted it. Especially since the contract was still beside him and Duke Azanek had not heard his response. This could only mean one thing. Something big definitely happened above. Whether it was good or bad he still didn't know. However, as he thought of the possibility of possibly escaping this place, a fire lit up inside of Edward's heart, prompting him to keep enduring this lonely and silent place. It was at that moment, the door cell finally opened up and light began to spill into the room. Edward's eyes reflexively squinted at the light. It took him a couple of seconds to adjust to the light, And once he did, he was finally able to catch a glimpse of the figure he so desperately wanted to see. A little trembling appeared in his mouth as his pent-up emotions started to surface. In an attempt to suppress his emotions, he mumbled, "Took you long enough." Chapter 537. A good laugh. Hearing Edward's brittle voice that was pent up with all his emotions, I smiled softly. "Sorry, I had to take a little detour." Clank. Clank. With my sword unsheathed, I hacked at the chains that bound him and freed his arms and legs. Following the release of the chains, he started to fall down. In response, I lowered my body and pressed my hand on his shoulder, preventing his fall. "Are you okay?" "Yeah." Glancing at me, Edward had a bitter look on his face. "It's been a while since I've moved, and with my mana sealed for this long, my muscles just gave out. It's all right. I'll help you out for now." Supporting Edward's body up, I helped him out of the room. On our way out, Edward opened his mouth and asked, "Did you do it?" His voice sounded rather weak and frail. Glancing at him from the corner of my eyes, I nodded. "Yeah." When I recalled my other self's conversation with the Duke, there were times when I was afraid that the deal would have fallen apart. Especially during that time my other self had threatened him. If there was one thing you learned at the lock about demons, it was never to threaten a demon belonging to the Pride clan. If he hadn't been wary of the rumors about my strength, I would have been afraid he would have just attacked me then and there. Fortunately, my other self knew when to back down, and from there was able to make a deal with the Duke. Thankfully, I didn't have to give anything up. Initially, the Duke was against the idea of me keeping my stuff, but considering what he would gain, he eventually relented. It wasn't every day he would get a core belonging to a Duke-ranked demon. Furthermore, with multiple alibis pointing out the fact that I had killed him, he could consume it without worrying. No Duke would refuse such a tempting offer. Well, it wasn't like my other self gave him any choice to begin with. "Took you a while." While I was carrying Edward on my shoulders, appearing right in front of us was Lightning Dragon. His appearance shocked Edward as he looked at me. "What is he doing here?" Nodding in Lightning Dragon's direction, I glanced at Edward. "He's our ticket out of the demon realm." "Our ticket out?" "Yeah. He knows of a portal that can lead us back to Earth." Edward's face relaxed as soon as he heard those words. Staring in Lightning Dragon's direction, he nodded his head. "I'll be in your care. Don't worry about it." Waving his hand to brush him off, Lightning Dragon took a couple of black robes from his dimensional space and handed them to us. "For now it's best if you wear this." "Sure." "Okay." Simultaneously nodding our heads, Edward and I took the hoodies and put them on. This was something that the Duke had ordered. Since he was planning on consuming the core, he couldn't let it seem as though he was working with me. If it did, his plans would instantly crumble. Well, that was unless he decided to kill all witnesses, and realistically speaking, that was a bit more of a hassle than doing things this way. So, in the midst of putting on the robe, I suddenly heard Edward's voice. I turned my head to look his way. Did he need something? His next words made my expression harden. "I've been meaning to ask this for quite a while, but what's your relationship with my daughter?" Scratching the side of my cheek, I carefully answered. "The both of us attended the same academy, so we can say we're classmates." Honestly, it was a bit more complicated than that, but my gut told me to leave it as it was. "I see." As Edward raised the hoodie to cover his face, he nodded his head. He then patted me on the shoulder. "I was just curious. No need to stiffen up." After that, he walked up ahead. Turning my head to stare at his back, I secretly sighed in relief. During that brief moment, I felt an incredible pressure coming out of his body that I couldn't quite explain. And he wasn't even channeling his mana or anything of the sort. Overprotective dad. Shaking my head, I followed him from behind and caught up with Lightning Dragon, who looked at me with a strange look on his face. "What? You interested in his daughter?" In a glare, I turned around and walked away. "Put your hoodie on and let's go. We don't have much time." "This way." Following Lightning Dragon, I, along with Edward and another figure, navigated dense vegetation. Our current destination was the portal Lightning Dragon used to travel to the demon realm. From the demon realm to Earth, there was only one way to get there, and that was through portal devices they created. Not only that, but they also needed to have specific coordinates installed in them. Despite the fact that dungeon desyncs could be used to access the demon realm, the same could not be said for demons. The only way to enter a dungeon was through the portals that were set up on Earth. Lowering my hoodie, I stared at Lightning Dragon, who was a little bit up ahead, and asked, "How long do we have left till we arrive?" "We're here." Lightning Dragon abruptly halted his footsteps. Also stopping, I curiously looked around the place. It soon dawned on me that we were in the middle of nowhere. Lowering my head to glance at Lightning Dragon again, I asked, "Where exactly is this portal?" Looking around the place, Lightning Dragon embarrassingly scratched the side of his neck. Taking another look at his surroundings, a wry smile appeared on his face. "I forgot." Shit. When I heard his words, I couldn't help but facepalm. I forgot about his crappy memory. Are you seriously telling me that he is the key to escaping the demon realm? These words were of course directed to my other self, who was the one that told me that Lightning Dragon was the only one that could help me escape this place. "You don't remember?" Suddenly, Edward's voice echoed throughout the forest. Sharing the same dumbfounded look, he asked, "Didn't you say that you knew a way out?" "I did." Lightning Dragon, no. Liam nodded his head. "I know that it's somewhere here." With a frown on his face, he turned to look at the other figure that was with us. "Do you perhaps know of a way to sense where the portal is?" "I can try." In a look of disdain, the figure lowered his hood and displayed his horns before nodding his head and scanning the area. "I can help out too." Edward offered to lend a hand as he too started to look for the portal. Leaning back on one of the threes, I shook my head. If only the Duke had his own portal. It was necessary to know the coordinates of the two locations in order to set up a portal. And since the Duke had never been to Earth, we couldn't use his portal. Secondly, demonic energy was required in order to activate the portal. And since none of us could use it, the Duke had a demon accompany us. It was part of the deal we struck. Echi. I let out a long and tired sigh and stared at the sky. Although I wanted to help, my body was still aching from the side effect of the skill. And although the pain was a lot less than before, it was still there. I could only hope they would find. But half an hour eventually passed and the results remained the same. My mouth twitched. How useless. Let me help out as well. Scratching my back, I quickly scanned my surroundings. But upon realizing just how vast the place was, my face sank a little. This might take a W. I found it. Just as I was about to start searching, I heard Liam's voice. He then appeared in the distance holding a small circular device. "You found it." With a look filled with relief and excitement, Edward walked up to him before looking at the demon. "Can you activate it?" "Yes." Taking the device from Liam's hand, demonic energy suddenly sprang out from the demon's body as he started channeling it toward the portal-like device. Prick, prick, prick. Immediately after the demon channeled his demonic energy, thin black threads appeared in the air, and minuscule tearing sounds could be heard. Within 10 minutes, a black portal started to appear before us. A significant amount of paleness appeared on the demon's face while the portal was forming. It was evident that it took him a lot of demonic energy to activate the portal. In the end, he struggled for a couple more minutes before he finally dropped it to the ground. "I'm done." His rough breathing echoed throughout the forest. He looked exhausted. "You've done a good job." Walking up to the demon, I calmly patted my hand on his shoulders. "I'm only doing this whack. Suddenly, I stabbed the demon in his abdomen area and broke his core before he could finish his sentence. "I'm the same. I'm also doing this for the Duke." Even though I didn't want to do this, given the deal I made with the Duke, I had no choice. No one could know about the fact that I struck a deal with the Duke. This was part of the agreement we made. It took the demon a few seconds to disintegrate after I cracked the core. But once he did, a breeze brushed past, scattering what remained of him in the air. As I stared at the area where the demon died, I glanced toward the portal before turning my attention to the other two. "Let's go. It's time to return." Duke Adrameleka's voice. Drumming his fingers over his desk, Duke Adramelek stared at a small letter in front of him. "An acquaintance of mine might come soon. Give this to him if you meet him." An acquaintance? Who was he talking about? Duke Adramelek had no idea. But thinking back at the figure, the Duke decided to comply. Although he couldn't feel any strength from him, especially one that could threaten him, whenever he thought back on his look, the Duke would sense a distinct sense of fear coming from him. "He isn't simple," the Duke thought as he picked up the letter and wondered out loud. Just what in the world is he talking about? It was at that moment. A huge tear suddenly materialized in the middle of the room, startling the Duke, who stood up and shouted. "Who? Calm down." Answering him was a calm voice. Taking a step outside the portal, a white-haired figure appeared. As soon as he stepped out of the portal, the Duke prostrated himself. This sudden movement wasn't out of his will, but it was simply his incidents acting for him. But it didn't take too long for him to figure out what had happened. Bloodline suppression. As a result of the suppression of the bloodline, the Duke was able to recognize the figure that had just entered instantly. It was the Demon King. "Your Majesty," he shouted as his body shook uncontrollably. "What is His Majesty doing here? Did he figure out what I have done? How is this possible?" A feeling of fear overtook him and he kept his head down, refusing to look at him. As the Duke's body continued to shake, the Demon King's next words almost caused the soul to leave his body. "Have you seen a human with blue eyes and white hair?" So, the Duke's mouth automatically opened as a powerful pressure bore down on his body. He didn't do this willingly, as he felt a strange power controlling him, prompting him to reveal the truth only. "Why, yes. Where is he?" "Gone. Gone." "Why?" "Yes. He already left, and only left one thing behind." "He left something behind?" Scanning the room, Jezebeth's eyes soon paused on a letter in the middle of the Duke's desk. Feeling a familiar aura, he asked, "Is it that letter?" "Why, yes. He said that I needed to give it to an acquaintance." "Acquaintance?" Curious, Jezebeth walked up to the desk and picked up the letter. Seeing the Demon King take the letter, the Duke shivered even more. "Rip." Taking apart the letter, Jezebeth unfolded it and read its contents. "Got bored waiting for you, so I took my leave. Let's meet each other next time. As Jezebeth stared at the letter, there was a brief moment of silence. Suddenly the room froze completely and the Duke's breath stopped. Not long after, the Demon King's back began to tremble. As soon as the Duke saw this, his face paled considerably. "Oh no. Your Majesty. Please." "Ha ha ha." But it was at that moment that the Duke suddenly heard the Demon Lord burst out in laughter, and the room trembled uncontrollably. The Duke froze at the sight. The Demon King can laugh? The holy rulers of the demons and a figure that is believed to be as strong as a god was laughing? Duke Adramelech couldn't believe his eyes as he gazed at him. "Ah, got bored of waiting for me? Were you even waiting for me in the first place?" With another burst of laughter, the room shook even more fiercely. Witnessing this sight caused the Duke's mouth to repeatedly open and close. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Is this the same person that entered the room not too long ago? Am I perhaps in the clear? Did the Demon King not catch his scheme to digest Duke Azaneca's core? No, I did. Exclamation point. But it was at that moment that a soft whisper echoed in the Duke's head, startling him completely. Before the Duke had a chance to say anything else, he felt a tap on his forehead and his body completely disintegrated. With his gaze lingering in the direction of where the Duke once was, Jezebeth softly mumbled, "Nice try." Then, crumbling the letter in his hand, he turned to look in a certain direction before muttering, "You never fail to amuse me." Chapter 538 Warmth. Work. As I gripped the grass, I felt my stomach churn, and it wasn't long before I found myself vomiting on the ground. Fucking port, Borg. Midway through my sentence, I once again puked on the ground as I felt a sudden wave of nausea wash over me. It's always like this with portals, and just when I thought I had gotten over it. It had been quite a while since I had last puked from a portal. After recently thinking I had become accustomed to it, I was disappointed to discover that this was only my delusion. In the midst of my puking spree, I suddenly heard the sound of someone puking close by. Borg. Upon turning my head slightly, I noticed Liam in a similar situation to mine. As a matter of fact, he appeared in a worse state than mine, as his face was swollen and tears were streaming down his eyes. Damned port, Borg. I felt a great deal of sympathy for him after seeing how badly he was affected by the portal. Poor hi. Bwag. You guys. A helpless voice echoed while Liam and I were puking. It belonged to none other than Edward, the only one that seemed unaffected by portal sickness. How can you still stand? I managed to get out a few words when I raised my head to gaze at him. It had to be noted that portal sickness was a very real thing that people suffered from, and the longer the journey, the more prevalent this was. It was weird for Edward to be unaffected by this. With a shrug of his shoulders, Edward answered, "I just have a stronger stomach than the two of you." Ugh. I groaned. After that, it took about 5 minutes for both Liam and I to finally recover from portal sickness. Once I did, I finally stood up and looked around me. Currently we were in a vast grassland. Immediately, my gaze was drawn to the mountains on the horizon, which were surrounded by a sea of trees. The sight was breathtaking. Taking a glance at Liam, I asked, "Where exactly are we?" "I don't know." His reply was quick. But immediately after that, my face changed a little. Never mind. Need to make a mental note to myself about his bad memory. Tapping on my bracelet, I took out my phone and checked the top bar to see if there was any signal. Fortunately, it seemed as though I was in luck. 2 bars. Good enough. Ding. 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 It was at that moment that my phone started chiming repeatedly as over 100 different notifications came in at once. It was a bit overwhelming as my phone froze up. Furthermore, most of the notifications were useless as they belonged to some apps or were just advertisements. I quickly discarded those. Halfway through deleting them, I noticed that I also received plenty of messages from the others. Kevin sent me quite a few. ==Sadface Kevin Voss. Kevin, where are you? Kevin, why did you suddenly leave without telling anyone? Kevin, I swear. Kevin, I've just broken through rank. If you don't inform me soon, I will have no choice but to leave without you. Kevin, on a side note, does the quote, "You have to look through the rain to see the rainbow," sound good? ==Sadface Kevin Voss. I quickly discarded his messages. He lost me on the last message. Oh, I also received texts from my mom. I quickly checked those. =Sadface Mom. Mom, my sweet boy. My favorite son. My son who I have barely seen over the last 5 years. I just came to learn about your little trip. One that would last for half a year. I'm totally fine with you going, but couldn't you have given your mother a little heads up? You know, because I'm your mother? You probably won't see this message for a while, so when you do, call me. If you don't, =Sadface Mom. The message ended there, but I felt a chill run down my spine as soon as I saw it. Without hesitation, I glanced toward the others to make sure they weren't listening. As a sign of precaution, I moved a little bit further. Immediately, I dialed my mother's number. Ring. Ring. The call soon went through, but there was an empty silence behind it. She's mad. Forcing a smile, I started to speak. Mom, it's me, your favorite son. I'm back. I was once again met with silence. It was from that moment that I realized I was in deep shit. Mo. Are you okay? Just as I was about to say something, my mother cut me off and spoke. Hearing her voice, I sighed in relief. I'm fine. I just came back a couple of minutes ago and, lowering my head, I glanced at my body. Making sure that everything was still there, I continued. It seems like all of my limbs are intact. That's good. My mother replied in a rather flat and short tone. My brows furrowed a little when I noticed this. Thinking of the worst, I felt my heart sink as my voice became rushed. Is everything okay? Did something happen while I was gone? Don't tell me that something happened. No. To my relief, it didn't seem to be the case as my mother continued. Nothing happened while you were gone. Everyone is fine. Is that so? Yes. Then what was the problem? Don't tell me she's giving me the silent treatment. While scratching the side of my neck, I decided that the best thing to do at the moment was to apologize. Listen, Mom, I'm sorry for not telling you that I was going to leave, but back then circumstances forced me to do this. The only reason I went to the demon realm was to sort out my head, not because I wanted to train and explore the place. Despite not showing it outside, I was still suffering from my past experiences at the monolith. To cope with everything that was happening, I resorted to taking Melissa's potions. Since then, everything was going well. Nightmares became less frequent and I was able to sleep more comfortably. All in all, my life seemed to be normal. Potions were not a long-term solution, unfortunately. 2 months into the demon realm, they ceased to be useful, and 2 more months later they stopped working altogether. The nightmares began to return from that point on. In spite of this, they did not seem to affect me as much as they used to. This was to be expected. I had gone through ever harsher experiences since then, and my mind had hardened a little. Even then, they still affected me from time to time. I really need to find a long-term solution for this problem. If not, I might one day end up losing it again as I did back in S94. Raising my head to stare at the mountains in the distance, I continued to talk. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that the place I went wasn't dangerous, but you should know very well that it is very darn hard to kill me. Some might even call me a cockroach. I understand. Cutting me off, I heard my mother's voice. I instantly stopped speaking the moment I heard her voice. After a short pause, she continued. We'll have a talk once you get back home. For now, answer me this. Will you be back home on time for dinner? Dinner? Give me a second. Lowering my head, I glanced at my watch and checked the time, 14:03. Once I checked the time, I also checked my location through the GPS on my watch. Licking my lips, I did a quick scan of the map. We're not that far from Ashton City. In fact, we're pretty close to the Clayton Ridge. If we take the train, we might be able to make it by 2 hours before dinner. Having confirmed that everything was in order, I responded to my mother. Yes, I should be able to make it back for dinner. Okay, I will make one extra meal. Natasha and Amanda will also be joining, so it won't really make a difference. Ah. The moment my mother mentioned Amanda and Natasha's names, I suddenly remembered something and turned my head to glance at Edward in the distance, who was currently helping Liam recover from the portal sickness. Turning my head back, I whispered, Mom, can you add another person? Another person? Yeah. Don't worry about who it is, you will know once we arrive. Okay. Her voice sounded rather confused, but she still nevertheless complied. Thank you, Mom, I will come back home soon. I will see you later. Okay. See you soon. Following her words, she hung up on me. Scratching the back of my head, I turned to look at Edward and Liam in the distance. Are you two done? Shall we go back home now? Insidious Guild and Raging Dragon Guilds have both filed for bankruptcy. Following their actions, we've received several letters from the central government telling us to stop. How should we proceed? Ignore them. Continue as planned. Tell the central government to stop meddling in our affairs. If this persists, we will no longer hold back, even if costs our guild to go under. Amanda's threatening voice echoed throughout her office space as she glanced in Maxwell's direction. Following their plan to take over all of the guilds that planned on harming her guild, the central government decided to interfere. Although their actions were understandable, it was still disappointing. In light of the fact that her actions were destroying several diamond-graded guilds, their actions didn't seem so unreasonable. Not that Amanda cared. This is something we must do. We will look like pushovers if we listen to the Central Guild. It is unfortunate that several diamond-graded guilds will go down as a result of our actions, but this is a result of their actions. Who told them to provoke us? While she was talking, her eye would repeatedly glance toward a pen holder that sat on the far end of her desk. It was slightly tilted to the right. Just a little. In an effort to look like a proper guild representative, Amanda tried her best to not mind the slightly distorted pen holder. But it was hard. Really hard. Her finger twitched underneath her desk. I agree with your assessment, young miss. As the saying goes, if we give them an inch, they will take a mile. I will quickly share your, is everything all right, young miss? Yes. In response to Maxwell's words, Amanda straightened her back. Keeping her face straight, she glanced at Maxwell. Do exactly that. Please do tell the elders about the situation. Okay. With a rather confused look on his face, Maxwell eventually nodded his head and turned around. Now is my time. In the exact moment he turned around, Amanda reached for the far end of the desk and adjusted the pen holder. A wave of relief washed over her body when she did this. But, you really need to fix your habits, young miss. Weren't you leaving? I was. And, have a good day, young miss. With a satisfied smile, Maxwell left the office. Staring at his disappearing back, Amanda's eyes squinted. He knows too much. Piving. At the exact moment Maxwell left, Amanda's phone rang. Lowering her head, Amanda's back straightened once more. It was a message from Samantha. Sad face Samantha Dover. Samantha. Amanda dear, please join us for dinner today at 8 p.m. Your mother will also be coming and she will be sad if you don't come. Don't be late. Sad face Samantha Dover. The tone. A bitter smile appeared on Amanda's face as she read the message. From the tone of the message, It appeared as though this was not an invitation but an order. H.A. Letting out a long and tired sigh, Amanda started to clear out her schedule. Might as well. Chapter 539 Warmth. Like. During the slow opening of the air train doors, a sweet voice lingered in the air. You have arrived at the station. We're here, let's go. Okay. Standing up, Edward was the first one to head out of the train. Similarly standing up, I glanced at Liam, who was sitting on the seat beside me. Are you going to be fine by yourself? No problem. My eyes squinted. He nodded. You sure? Positive. All right then. With a casual shrug of my shoulders, I showed him my phone. In case you forget where you're supposed to be, you can still call my number. Well, that is of course unless you also forget that, in which case I won't be able to help you at all. I should be fine. If you say so. Finishing my drink and putting it down on the table, I bid farewell to Liam and left the train. All right, see you. Goodbye. Beep. Beep. Moments after I got off the train, I heard beeping sounds come from the train and the doors closed. A short time later, the train sped away. It was then that Edward moved next to me and asked, "Have any idea where he's going?" No clue at all. He just said that he had some stuff to do. Right before we left the demon realm, I had proposed to him to join my mercenary group. On a good note, he accepted my offer and we were soon going to meet each other again. On a bad note, he said that he was only going to be a member in name, meaning that he would help whenever he was free. Apparently, he didn't like being chained down by organizations, as that was too boring for him. I tried to convince him otherwise, but he didn't seem to budge and I eventually had to step back and accept his terms. It was better than nothing. I guess I better get going now. Jolting me out of my thoughts was Edward's voice. Turning around, I placed my hand over his shoulder. Where are you going? To my guild and meet my daughter? Nope. Edward looked at me with a confused look. Taking a closer look at him, I shook my head. Not like this, you are. It wasn't until Edward felt my gaze that he realized what was wrong. It was the fact that he was dressed as a hobo at the moment. While he was in the arena, his clothes were in good condition, but after being trapped in a prison for a few days, he grew a rough beard and he smelled. Additionally, his clothes showed signs of tearing due to the demon's treatment. He was just unpresentable. It would be best if we got you something to change in before you meet your daughter. And your wife as well. But I wasn't going to tell him this. Wanted to create a surprise for the two of them. That's it. Suddenly, Edward's eyes locked on me and I realized my tongue had slipped. Would you please correct me if I heard you incorrectly, or did you just say we were going to meet my daughter in your apartment? I meant my parents' house. With a slight cough, I kept a straight face. Weren't you there during the meeting where I introduced magic cards? Yeah. Edward's eyes squinted. I continued. Well, considering just how much money was involved, I had asked Amanda to send some people to look after my parents and she moved them to stay next to her apartment. After that, Amanda and my mother got along well with each other, and sometimes she comes over for dinner. I see. With a slight nod, Edward's face flashed with sadness. At a glance, I could tell what he was thinking. He must be thinking that she was lonely. Pressing my hands against his back, I pushed him forward. Enough with that look. Let's get you changed and show Amanda the best version of yourself, and not some hobo version. Watch it. You can't deny reality. Ignoring the stares coming from the people beside us, I somehow managed to bring Edward to a nearby retail shop to get him some decent clothes and a haircut. That was how we spent the remaining 2 hours before dinner. 7:30 p.m. Ding. Dong. Samantha rushed to the door when the doorbell rang. I'm sure it's Natasha. Since Amanda was due to arrive a little later for guild business, Samantha assumed the person outside was Natasha. Only she would arrive so early. Her instincts proved correct when she opened the door and found a familiar figure behind it. With a bright smile on her face, Natasha greeted Samantha while holding a basket of goods. My apologies for intruding. Come on in. A smile spread on Samantha's face as she took a step to the side. Make yourself at home. Thank you. As Natasha handed Samantha the bag of goods, she slowly entered the room. Immediately after coming in, she was met with the sight of Nola playing with Ronald, her father. Taking note of her appearance, Ronald greeted her with a nod. She greeted back. Nice to see you. You too. Immediately after greeting him, Natasha's eyes fell on Nola. Her face instantly melted. Nola, how have you been doing? Sister Natasha. After escaping her father's grasp, Nola ran up to Natasha and hugged her, causing her face to melt even more as she patted her head. I am a sister, that's right. With a broad smile on her face, Natasha put Nola down. Then turning her head, she looked in Samantha's direction. Do you need any help? Not thank you. Walking toward the dinner table, she carefully placed 7 plates. Natasha, who was looking at her, quickly took notice of this and asked. 7 plates. There are 2 extra plates. It's deliberate. Samantha answered. Her tone was rather chilly. Deliberate. Who could the other guests be? Ah. It was at that moment that she thought of something. Did he return? Samantha's hand paused the moment Natasha's words left her mouth. But after a while, with her usual smile, she continued to set the dishes in place. Yeah, and he's apparently bringing an extra guest. An extra guest? Natasha curiously cocked her head. Did he say anything about who the guest is? No clue. Setting the last dish down, Samantha cleaned her hand with a small rag and headed back to the kitchen. You know him. He won't tell me anything anyway, so I guess we can only find out when he's coming. What a troublesome boy. Standing up, Natasha started to feel great sympathy for Amanda. Oh, daughter of mine. I might not judge you for your tastes, but you are in for a tough battle ahead. A man like Rin was hard to tame. I think it's best if I hell. Ding. Dong. Halfway through her sentence, the door suddenly rang. Immediately after the door rang, leaning her head out of the kitchen, Samantha looked at Natasha. Natasha, would you mind getting the door? Sure. Raising her thumb, Natasha slowly walked up to the door. While she walked to the door, she thought to herself. Did he already arrive, or is it Amanda? Either way, she would find out soon enough as she reached her hand out to grasp the doorknob. Click. Opening the door with a bright smile on her face, she welcomed the guests. Welcome. But halfway through her sentence, her face suddenly froze. After that, her face became significantly paler. Boo. But, how? Moments before. This is the place. The moment Ren's voice echoed out, Edward's feet came to a pause. Staring at the door in front of him, he took a deep breath. This where you live? Yeah. Ren nodded from the side. Robotically turning his head, he asked. Yo, oh, you nervous? There was a slight stutter in his voice as he spoke. This caught Edward's direction as he stared in his general direction. I want to ask you the same thing. You nervous? Me? Ren instantly scoffed at his question. I'm definitely not nervous at all. We gone up against Duke-ranked demons. I am definitely not scared of my other, as if. Then why are you shaking? Edward almost blurted out as he saw Ren shaking even more fiercely. However, he decided against it. He probably had his own circumstances. That said, I feel a bit better now. Witnessing Ren's state, Edward felt a lot calmer. Taking another deep breath, he extended his hand and pressed on the doorbell of the house. As he did, he made sure to smile. Ding. Dong. The doorbell timed at the push of the button, and the sound of rushed footsteps echoed from behind the door. Click. Within moments, a stunning beauty emerged from behind the door, her hair falling gracefully down her shoulders and her eyes reflecting an innocence that seemed to abound. With a bright smile that seemed to light up the surroundings, she greeted. Welcome. Then halfway through her sentence, Edward's gaze caught hers and the two of them froze in place. As if time had frozen still, a deep silence prevailed over the area as the two of them stared at each other. Neither believed what they were seeing. It can't be. The first to break the silence was Edward, who repeatedly shook his head and took a step back. Impossible. As he struggled to find the right words to say, he felt a lump in his throat. The woman whose crystal eyes were now filled with tears stood by the door, and Edward was overcome with a sharp pain in his heart. He grasped his clothes as he took another step back. That woman. There was no way he wouldn't recognize her. She was the only woman who had left a deep imprint in his heart, and the woman who had also torn his heart apart. Despite the fact that she looked like Amanda, Edward would not mistake her for her. That was the depth of her imprint on his heart. Throughout the years he had never forgotten about her. She may have left abruptly, but Edward never forgot about her. After all, he knew why she had left him. Of course he knew. He may have not been as powerful as he was now, but he still had his means, and when he learned the truth of the matter, he felt a little piece of him tear apart. In the end, despite all of my power, I couldn't do anything to stop what happened. Often mumbling to himself those words, he would isolate himself and focus on his work, neglecting Amanda. The reality was that Edward had never been too busy in the past to support Amanda. In fact, he did have time. He felt a suffocating sensation every time he glanced at Amanda, as he recalled his past with Natasha and her actions. It was as if he were trapped in a room filled with water with only a small opening for air. Despite his best efforts, he simply couldn't do it. It was only later that he managed to come to terms with Natasha's sacrifice. Even then, the damage had already been done, and Amanda stopped expressing her emotions. The sight broke him. Just what kind of father would allow his daughter to experience such a neglected childhood? His decision to move on from the past began at that moment. At least that was how it was supposed to be. When Edward stared at the figure in front of him, he felt a surge of emotions as his body trembled uncontrollably. In an effort to quiet his trembling mouth, he bit his lip. Eventually he managed to mutter something. "Nah, Tasha, is that really you?" "Ah." Hearing his voice, a tear trickled down Natasha's cheeks as both her hands were pressed against her mouth. As she struggled to speak, her choking sounds echoed throughout the apartment corridors. A few moments later, she weakly nodded her head. "Why, yes." Chapter 540 Warmth 3. I should probably take my leave. As Edward and Natasha stood by the door in silence, I took this moment to finally enter my house. Didn't want to get in between the reunion of the two. As I stepped into the house, my body unknowingly began to relax. It was the same old corridor, the same old smell, the familiar voices in the distance. Everything was the same as it had been before. A thin smile spread across my face as I took out my shoes and placed them on the shoe rack. Afterward, my shoulders stiffened a bit, but I still gathered the courage to walk into the living room. It was now or never. And just as I managed to gather my courage, a familiar figure emerged from the kitchen and met my gaze. Did something happen to Natasha? It's taking her. Both of our feet came to a stop as we stared at each other. At that moment, silence enveloped the corridors of the house as neither one of us spoke. She looks the same as always. As she wore a nice blue apron, my mother looked exactly as she did half a year ago, with her blonde hair falling to the right side of her shoulders that perfectly complemented her blue eyes. Her deep blue eyes, which bore a striking resemblance to mine, scrutinized my body carefully as a variety of emotions flashed across them. I could definitely feel hints of anger coming from her, but above all else I could feel the relief in them as she looked at me. Breaking the uncomfortable silence, I waved my hand in the air and smiled awkwardly. It's been a while, Mom. How have you been?" As she stared at me, I was only met with deep silence. After a while, wiping her hands on her apron, she subtly nodded her head. "You're back." Her voice sounded rather monotonous. I inwardly groaned when I heard the tone of her voice. With her head raised, she nudged me. "What happened to your hair? Did you dye it? A new style?" I started to scratch the back of my head. How should I explain this? I definitely couldn't tell her that this was a result of my body suffering a trauma due to accessing a power that was far above mine. Circumstances happened. In the end, that was all that I could mutter. Although I could have lied about my circumstances, I decided against it and just decided to be vague. My mother was a living lie detector. There was no point in lying. "Okay." In the same apathetic manner as before, she turned to the kitchen. Before entering the kitchen, I was able to hear her last words. "Go and take a shower. Dinner will be ready in half an hour." Staring at her disappearing back, I raised my armpits and smelled them. Ugh. My head recoiled back as I thought. I really do stink. Ha. Letting out an exhausted sigh, I proceeded to head for my room. But just before I did so, I stopped by in the living room to greet my father and Nola. After turning right in the living room, I noticed the two sitting together on the sofa. As Nola scooted close to Dad, she pointed at the screen of the tablet he was holding. Her eyes were filled with curiosity. Why did he jump the fence? Because it is quicker this way. But isn't that naughty? Very naughty. As I listened to their conversations, I couldn't help but smile. Aren't the two of you going to greet me? At that moment, both heads snapped in my direction and we looked each other in the eye. The first to react was Nola as she jumped out of the sofa with an excited look on her face. Broth. But halfway through her sentence, as though she recalled something, the excitement on her face disappeared and she sat back on the sofa with her arms crossed. Humph. She then turned her head and snorted. What? The sight left me shocked as I felt something pierce my heart. Moving up to her, I poked her little arms. Nola? Humph. But no matter what I did, she would repeatedly turn her head and avoid making eye contact with me. The sight of her reaction made me once again feel a piercing pain run through my heart as I started shaking her body. Hey Nola, it's me. Your big brother. I know my hair has changed, but it's still me. Humph. Don't do this to me. As I circled around Nola in an attempt to meet her gaze, my father's voice echoed out. Just leave her be for now. Okay. In the end, worried that she might twist her neck, I decided to stop. But the damage was already done as I gazed at my father in hopes of receiving some support. This is on you. Unfortunately, he didn't seem too keen on helping me as he shook his head. Raising his head, he patted me on the shoulder. It's good that you're back, but you best listen to your mother. Go and take a shower. All right. With my shoulders slumped, I turned to glance at Nola. For a brief moment of time, our eyes met, but she quickly turned her head and crossed her arms. Humph. Ah. No one loves me anymore. As I lowered my head, I headed to the bathroom to take a shower. Before that, I took a spare change of clothes. Closing the door behind me, I ended up muttering, I'm never doing this again. Edward lived over 15 years believing that his wife had died protecting him and their daughter. 15 years. For a human, 15 years was a frighteningly long time despite the increase in life expectancy. He had long come to terms with his wife's death. But, deeply staring into Natasha's eyes, Edward finally realized that she wasn't dead. She was still alive and she had just come back. Seeing the tears that were dripping down her cheeks, a smile soon formed on his face. You look the same as the last time I've seen you. He truly did. With her lustrous black hair, crystal clear eyes, and a look that would leave anyone speechless, she would be the envy of anyone who saw her. It was the same as in the past. Laying eyes on the woman in front of him, Edward was hit by a sudden wave of nostalgia as he couldn't help but think of the old days. Back when he still had her. He had thought that those days would have never ended. Who would have known what the future held for them? Had he known, he would have tried his best to stop whatever was going to happen. Alas, he knew that this was merely something he could only dream about and never accomplish. Why, you too. As Natasha nodded her head, tears started streaming from her eyes. Yo, you also haven't changed. You think so? Staring at his clothes, Edward embarrassingly scratched the back of his head. I didn't know that you were going to be here. If I did, I would have opted for better clothes. Wiping the tears from her eyes, Natasha's eyes fell on his clothes. I think they are fine as is. Carefully taking a step forward, her hand trembled as she reached out for his top button. But you forgot to button this one up. While fixing his top button, neither of them blushed. They just felt it was natural. It was as if this were the way things were supposed to be. She was done. Natasha took a step back and weakly smiled. You look much better. After staring at her for a couple of seconds, Edward realized they were in the middle of a corridor. Thinking for a moment, Natasha looked behind her. Wiping her eyes, she looked back at Edward. Seeing as we still have some time before Amanda arrives, why don't I show you what your daughter has been up to? As soon as Amanda's name was mentioned, Edward's face changed and he lowered his head. It's all my fault. It's all right. Caressing his cheek with her hand, Natasha raised her voice. Samantha, I'll be going back to my room for a couple of minutes. Several seconds later, Samantha replied. Don't worry about it. It will still take 10 more minutes before dinner is ready. Take your time. Thank you. Glancing in Edward's way, Natasha headed for her room. Come, I'll show you what your daughter has been up to all these years. I'm tired. Amanda thought as she pressed the elevator button. Immediately after pushing the elevator button, she felt a pushing sensation coming from beneath her teeth. I hope they will like this. Currently, she was holding a pie made by the guild's chef. Apparently, it was a rare delicacy that only a very few could taste as the milk came from a very rare breed of monster that could only be found in certain areas of the human domain. Because Amanda wasn't much of an eater, she didn't know how good it was. In spite of this, she knew that Nola loved sweets and that this would probably score some points with her. Thinking of Nola, Amanda smiled. Ding. Upon reaching the top floor, the elevator chimed and the doors opened. Knowing the place like the back of her hand, Amanda soon arrived in front of Ren's apartment and rang the bell. Immediately after she rang, the door opened and she was greeted by Samantha's large smile. Amanda, you're just in time. This is for you. Smiling back at her, Amanda handed her the cake. What's this? Surprise flashed across Samantha's face as she stared at the cake. A cake? How sweet of you. Let me quickly put it in the fridge. Extending her hands, she took the cake. What are you waiting for, Amanda? Come in, make yourself at home. If you will excuse me. Entering the apartment, Amanda took off her heels and placed them on the shoe rack beside her. Just as she was about to close the shoe rack, she suddenly heard the sound of rushed footsteps heading her way. Sister. Before Amanda knew it, Nola had already arrived before her and lunged her body in her direction. Any normal person would have been caught off guard by Nola's sudden actions. But Amanda wasn't. Extending her hands, she quickly caught Nola. Nola. Hey. Snuggling in Amanda's chest, Nola giggled. Then recalling something, Nola tugged at Amanda's clothing. Leaving Amanda's embrace, Nola urged Amanda to follow her. Come. You want me to follow you? Though confused, Amanda followed Nola all the way toward the other end of the house before stopping at a certain room. Isn't this Ren's room? Recognizing the room, Amanda looked at Nola in confusion. Why did you bring me here? Knock knock. Instead of answering her, Nola knocked on the door, much to Amanda's confusion. Within 2 seconds of the door knocking, the door opened, revealing a topless figure whose lower body was covered by a towel, and droplets of water flowed down his nearly perfect body. With his right hand holding onto a towel to dry his hair, he blinked a couple of times before asking, "What is it?" Amanda's body froze completely.